So I want you to imagine a surgeon standing over an operating table,
Okay.
and they have a scalpel in their hand. They're cutting directly into human tissue,
Right.
causing trauma, causing bleeding. I mean, actively inflicting physical damage on a vulnerable body.
Yeah, which sounds horrific out of context.
Exactly. If you had absolutely no idea what the concept of surgery was like, if you had zero context for modern medicine,
You call it a crime.
you would look at that act and call it torture. You'd call it this horrific, violent crime. But because you understand the surgeon's intent, right, because you know they are excising a tumor that is, well, slowly killing the patient.
You don't call it torture at all.
No, you call it healing. You call it salvation.
It is entirely about the framework of intent. I mean, the action itself is violent, obviously, but the underlying purpose completely transforms its moral weight.
And today, we're going to look at a philosophy that asks us to apply that exact same lens to, well, the worst miseries, the deepest pains, and the most frustrating contradictions of our entire lives.
Which is a huge ask. It really is. Welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're immersing ourselves in a highly detailed, honestly, incredibly provocative exploration of a text called Happiness and Misery.
Or, in its original context, Sihosra Ark.
Right. Written by the philosopher Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily.
And it's a text that fundamentally just completely rejects the modern assumption that comfort is the ultimate goal of human existence.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we live in an era where any form of emotional or physical discomfort is treated like
a glitch in the system.
yes, a glitch, something to be medicated or distracted from or just optimized away.
But Al-Waily, he looks at human emotion not as this fleeting weather pattern of moods, but as a rigid engineering problem.
Which is fascinating.
Right. He builds a structural blueprint of the human psyche where misery is not a tragedy. It's a necessary load-bearing mechanism.
Which is exactly why I really wanted to tear into these sources with you today, because reading Al-Waily's work challenges almost every single baseline assumption we have about what it means to be, a quote-unquote good person. Or even a happy person.
Exactly. It is highly pragmatic, sometimes quite controversial, and deeply structural. So rather than just floating the abstract here, I want to start exactly where Al-Waily starts his architectural blueprint.
Which is the conscience.
Right. He begins with the concept of the human conscience.
And, when most people use the word conscience, they're usually referring to a rather passive, reactive phenomenon.
Like the little angel on your shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. It's that vague, nagging little voice that tells you not to steal a candy bar or makes you feel a twinge of guilt when you lie to a friend.
But for Al-Waily, the conscience is absolutely not a passive whisper. He defines it as the literal, active command center of the human soul.
It's the exclusive seat of all positive human emotions.
And he positions this command center in a state of absolute perpetual siege. Like, he directly opposes the conscience to negative emotions, which, and this is key, he doesn't just call bad moods.
No, he frames them metaphorically, almost spiritually, really, as the devil.
And the imagery he uses to describe this proximity is incredibly visceral. I mean, the text sources a concept from Islamic scripture that describes Satan running through human veins in the exact same way that blood does.
Which is such a brilliant metaphor, Satan circulating like blood, because it totally destroys the illusion of external threat.
Right. We like to think of evil, or even just our own destructive tendencies, as a monster knocking on the front door.
Something outside of us that we just have to keep out.
Exactly. But Al-Waily is saying the monster is already inside the house.
It's in your circulatory system.
Yes. It is biological, it's intimate, and it is inescapable. Therefore, pleasing the conscience, which in his framework equates directly to pleasing God and aligning with the health of society, is this constant active filtration process.
You're constantly having to purify your own bloodstream, basically.
But the way he defines that purification, like the way he defines a positive emotion, is where the text really threw me for a loop.
How so?
Well, if I asked anyone on the street to name a positive emotion, they would say, love, happiness, or sympathy.
Sure.
And Al-Waily agrees, but he attaches this massive non-negotiable condition to it. He argues that a true positive emotion requires wanting good for everyone.
It has to be a universal desire for societal health.
Right. But then he introduces this jarring caveat. He argues that it is philosophically impossible and morally wrong to have sympathy for a criminal.
Yeah. That is a profound challenge to the modern blanket ideology of unconditional empathy we see today.
It really is. We are so often taught that feeling empathy for absolutely everyone, regardless of what they've done, is like the highest moral ground a human can achieve.
And Al-Waily fiercely rejects that.
I really wrestled with this part. I mean, my initial reaction was super defensive. I thought, shouldn't a highly evolved society be able to look at a wrongdoer, understand their broken background, and feel deep sympathy for them?
He points out a fundamental contradiction there.
He does. He says if you have sympathy for a criminal, that emotion is in direct, literal conflict with your sympathy for the victims of that criminal.
Precisely. You cannot simultaneously hold true protective love for the innocent and at the same time extend sympathetic shelter to the person who is actively destroying the innocent.
It's a zero-sum game.
It is a zero-sum emotional game in his utilitarian framework. If we return to your opening analogy of the surgeon, this is where it perfectly applies.
Oh, right.
The criminal in Al-Waily's societal body is the tumor.
Right. And if I am the surgeon and I start feeling deep, weeping sympathy for the tumor, if I think, oh, this poor cluster of cells is just trying to grow, it just wants to survive, I shouldn't harm it,
What happened?
the patient dies.
Exactly. Your misplaced empathy for the disease becomes an act of unspeakable cruelty toward the healthy body.
And this is the core of his really rigid definition of positive emotion. The punishment of a wrongdoer, the excision of the tumor, is not an act of vengeance for him.
It is absolutely not driven by the negative emotion of hatred.
Right. When executed properly, punishing the criminal is a deeply positive emotion because it establishes justice.
It creates safety for the majority. Empathy, for Al-Waily, must always serve the greater health of the societal organism. It is not some individual indulgence.
That completely reframes the entire concept of duty because it means that doing the right thing, satisfying this incredibly strict conscience, isn't always going to feel warm and fuzzy.
Sometimes it feels like cutting.
Yeah. But the text suggests that when a person commits to this duty, when they continuously align their actions with the greater good, even when it requires that tough love of the scalpel, it triggers what the text calls a feedback loop of perfection.
And that feedback loop is the actual mechanism of human elevation.
How does that work practically?
Well, when you act justly, you satisfy the conscience. That satisfaction yields a profound internal peace of mind.
Okay.
And then that peace of mind gives you the clarity to act even more justly in the future. It transforms an ordinary flawed person into a literal beacon of reform.
Al-Waily actually argues that this level of principled existence grants a person an immortal memory in society.
Yes, they become part of the structural integrity of civilization itself.
I want to contrast that immortal memory with how he describes the people who reject this duty. The wrongdoers, the corrupt, the deeply selfish folks.
Right, because we look at the world and we see people who act terribly but seem to have it all.
Exactly. They have the wealth, the power, the yachts. Society often assumes those people are happy, or at least, very comfortable.
But Al-Waily strips away that material facade and looks right at their internal architecture.
He paints a psychological profile of the wrongdoer as someone trapped in a state of suffocating paranoia.
He goes right back to the idea of the societal body. Because a deeply selfish person has acted against the collective conscience. Because they have operated as a tumor.
They fundamentally lack safety.
They do. They know, whether consciously or just in the darkest corners of their subconscious, that they are a pathogen.
And pathogens are eventually hunted by the immune system.
Exactly. They are jumping from one disaster, one cover-up, one manipulation to the next.
They live in a permanent defensive crouch.
They can never truly rest because their entire existence is predicated on exploiting a system that is fundamentally designed to eventually reject them.
They are terrified of the surgeon.
Always.
So if our internal peace, our escape from that paranoia, relies so heavily on how we interact with the external world, we have to look at how we actually deal with other people.
Which is the tricky part.
Extremely. Because aligning with society's health sounds great in theory, but extracting personal happiness from the incredibly messy reality of human interaction is a totally different beast.
Which brings us to a really fascinating psychological mechanism in Al-Waily's work. We can call it the reflection principle of happiness.
Yeah, he approaches human interaction with a sort of emotional mathematics, doesn't he?
He does. He argues that the absolute most direct, mathematically certain route to your own personal happiness is the active creation of happiness in others.
And I want to be really careful here because when people hear make others happy to be happy, it so often gets interpreted as martyrdom.
Oh, for sure. The idea that you have to burn yourself down to keep others warm.
Right, but that's not what he's saying at all.
Not even close. It is actually a highly self-interested philosophy. It is enlightened self-interest.
He argues that through tangible good deeds and kind words, you aren't giving away your peace of mind, you are investing it.
And that investment yields double the peace of mind in return.
For Al-Waily, the ultimate unbreakable state of human happiness is the combination of immense internal self-respect perfectly coupled with the genuine external respect of your peers.
It is the internal and external mirrors perfectly aligning.
Now, I can hear the cynics listening right now. They're driving or doing dishes, thinking, I try to do nice things, I try to be virtuous, and people just take advantage of me.
The world is full of evil people who will trample a good deed.
Exactly. But Al-Waily dives deeply into the psychology of the cynic and the corrupt person, and he makes a really bold claim about how they actually perceive virtue.
He unpacks a very profound psychological truth here. He asserts that even the most evil, deeply cynical or corrupt individuals secretly harbor an intense, unavoidable respect for virtuous people.
Wait, really? Even if they spend their entire lives mocking virtue?
Especially if they mock it.
How does that work?
Public mockery is often just a defense mechanism against internal inadequacy. The corrupt person might exploit the virtuous person, sure. They might call them naive to their face.
Right.
But internally, the text argues, they cannot help but revere the moral fortitude that they themselves completely lack.
They recognize the light precisely because they live in the dark.
Yes, that respect is a psychological inevitability. Virtue commands a frequency that even the most broken receiver still picks up.
There is something incredibly grounding about that idea, the notion that your integrity is registering on the societal radar, even if the people around you just refuse to acknowledge it out loud.
It validates the effort.
But the inverse of this reflection principle is utterly terrifying, because if the peak of happiness is self-respect paired with public respect,
He defines the absolute rock bottom of human misery as self-loathing paired with public hatred.
it is the total collapse of both mirrors.
When you know in your private conscience that you are broken and selfish, and the world reflects that exact brokenness right back at you with hostility.
There is nowhere to hide, not within yourself and not within your community.
And this total collapse, this lowest form of existence, is why he reserves his harshest, most blistering critique for a very specific type of person.
Right, he isn't just criticizing murderers or thieves here. He directs his fury at people who live entirely in the short term. People who have zero investment in their societal reflection.
He compares them to grazing animals.
Which is just a devastating analogy.
He is talking about individuals who operate exclusively on the bandwidth of immediate consumption.
Their only concerns are their immediate feed, their immediate comfort, their next hit of dopamine or status.
It's the after me the flood mentality.
Precisely. The grazing animal doesn't care if it eats the roots of the grass and destroys the pasture for the next generation. It only cares that its stomach is full today.
They are biologically alive, but philosophically, they are entirely dead.
They have no foresight, no conception of the immortal memory of society we talked about.
And because Al-Waily views this kind of short-term ignorance, this grazing animal mentality, as the absolute root cause of societal decay and structural misery, he follows his utilitarian logic to a very extreme conclusion.
A highly provocative conclusion regarding how society should be managed.
And as we delve into this next section of the text, it is really vital to approach it purely as philosophical observers.
Absolutely. Al-Waily's proposed solutions here touch on concepts that modern sensibilities rightly find deeply alarming. But to understand the full architecture of his thought, we really have to look at how far he was willing to take his desire to eradicate misery.
Exactly. We are looking at this as a historical and philosophical artifact.
So Al-Waily suggests that because society is fundamentally an organism and because misery is a disease within that organism, the solution must be structural, biological intervention.
He proposes a radical form of societal curation.
He argues that reproduction should be heavily encouraged for the wise, the healthy, and the virtuous.
But he explicitly suggests that reproduction should be strictly limited or entirely forbidden for criminals, the insane, and those with severe inherited diseases.
He does include a legalistic caveat, right?
Yeah, noting that these individuals may still marry, but their ability to pass on their genetic or behavioral legacy should be restricted.
This is, by any modern standard, an extreme eugenics-adjacent utilitarianism.
It treats human society quite literally like agriculture.
That is the exact underlying logic.
If you are a farmer and you want a thriving, disease-free crop, you aggressively prune the blighted branches, and you exclusively cultivate the seeds of your strongest plants.
Al-Waily is applying agricultural logic to human morality and biology.
He believes that ignorant people, or people prone to habitual criminality, are fundamentally slaves to their habits. They are not acting out of profound free will, they are acting out of biological or environmental programming.
And his fear is that they will blindly pass that programming down, creating this perpetual motion machine of misery that society has to constantly spend its resources fighting.
Exactly. He argues that the masses will blindly follow whatever habits and norms are established.
Therefore, he views it not as a violation of rights, but as a supreme moral obligation of the state to curate the population.
To ensure that the dominant habits being inherited both genetically and culturally are virtuous and healthy.
For Al-Waily, the collective peace of mind, the ultimate health of the societal body, will always mathematically outweigh the individual's right to perpetuate what he views as a cycle of suffering.
It is a fascinating, terrifying look at what happens when you prioritize the collective organism over individual autonomy to the absolute extreme.
It really forces you to ask where the boundary actually lies.
It does.
But let's pull back from the macro-engineering of society for a minute.
Sure.
Let's imagine we don't live in this utopian, heavily curated garden. We live in reality. Even if we all follow the rules, even if we cultivate self-respect and do our duty, catastrophic things are going to happen.
The biology of the world guarantees it.
Right. People get terminal illnesses, random accidents destroy families, economies collapse. How does Al-Waily's philosophy equip an individual to handle the inevitable, unpreventable arrival of pure misery?
This is where his work transitions from societal architecture into personal psychological armor. And he begins with an uncompromising reality check. He insists, unequivocally, that human life is never, under any circumstances, without pain or fatigue.
Anyone selling you a philosophy, a product, or a religion that promises a life entirely free of pain is selling you a dangerous illusion.
Exactly. The foundational key to surviving human existence, therefore, is the active, continuous expectation of both good and evil.
He argues that people who fail to expect evil, people who walk around assuming everything will just work out, are incredibly fragile.
They are. He says they will lose their minds over minor inconveniences. A flat tire ruins their entire month.
And a genuine tragedy, a profound loss, might entirely shatter their psyche or drive them to suicide, because the shock of the reality breaking their illusion is more violent than the tragedy itself.
Right.
As I was reading his insistence on expecting pain, I kept thinking about the mechanics of a vaccine.
That is a very apt parallel. Let's trace how that mechanism actually applies to human psychology.
Well, think about what a vaccine physically does. You don't hide the body from the virus. You actively introduce a small, dead, or weakened version of the pathogen into your system.
It doesn't kill you, but it forces your immune system to wake up.
It forces your body to recognize the threat and build antibodies. So when the actual live, lethal virus eventually hits your system, your body doesn't panic.
It doesn't overreact and destroy its own organs in a cytokine storm.
Exactly. It calmly recognizes the invader and deploys the defenses it already prepared. Al-Waily is essentially telling us to vaccinate our minds with the expectation of misery.
It is psychological inoculation. By expecting the misery, you are creating mental antibodies.
And this is a crucial distinction, I think. Al-Waily is absolutely not advocating for a gloomy, paralyzing pessimism.
No, he isn't saying you should wake up every day depressed because the world is going to end.
Yeah.
Pessimism drains your energy.
What he is advocating for is a sturdy, calculated realism.
It's the difference between cowering in a bunker waiting for an earthquake versus building your house with reinforced steel because you know you live on a fault line.
Precisely. When you expect that systems will break down, that people will betray you, or that health will falter, you do not panic when those things happen.
And as Al-Waily observes human nature, he notes that panic is often way more destructive than the original disaster.
When a person panics, they thrash around blindly in the muddy waters of their own anxiety.
They make impulsive decisions that usually create 3 massive new problems, while entirely failing to solve the original issue.
But the expectation of pain, allows for a calm, calculated clinical response. You mitigate the damage because you aren't fighting the reality of the damage.
And the text roots this necessity for pain in a very ancient universal concept. It quotes Ali bin Abi Talib, who said, "Without imperfection, perfection wouldn't be known. Without ugliness, beauty wouldn't be known."
It is the absolute necessity of contrast.
Human perception requires contrast to function. Without the existence of disease, we have no conceptual framework for what health actually is.
If we never felt pain, health would just be this invisible, unappreciated baseline. We wouldn't protect it, we wouldn't value it, and we wouldn't feel joy in it.
And Al-Waily takes this contrast principle and offers a deep theological comfort alongside it. He asserts that the universe is intentionally designed this way.
He writes that God creates nothing in vain.
There is no wasted energy, no wasted matter, and therefore no wasted suffering. Every evil, every moment of misery possesses a hidden utility.
This is a monumental shift in how a human being experiences suffering.
It really is.
If you are hit by a tragedy and you believe it is just random, meaningless chaos, the emotional weight will crush you. You become a passive, helpless victim of a cruel universe.
But if you adopt Al-Waily's framework, if you deeply believe that this specific suffering has a hidden utility, even if your limited human mind cannot see it yet, it prevents emotional collapse.
It forces you to become an active seeker of meaning.
You start interrogating your pain. You ask, what structural weakness in my life is this pain exposing? What is this darkness defining?
Okay, so we have the psychological armor. We are inoculated against the shock of disaster. But you can't build a life solely on defense.
No, you need a proactive strategy.
And Al-Waily provides a very specific, practical roadmap for the best possible life. He lists 5 explicit pillars or requirements for a balanced existence.
And the order of these pillars feels deeply intentional.
They are health, reason, fulfilling duties, living within one's means, and contentment with what exists.
Let's analyze the architecture of that list because it really is a causal chain. He begins with health.
The inescapable foundation.
Exactly. Without physical and mental health, every other pursuit is compromised or impossible. A body in chronic pain or a mind distorted by severe illness cannot perceive reality accurately.
It takes monumental, heroic effort just to survive, leaving very little bandwidth for higher philosophical pursuits.
Which leads directly into the second pillar. Reason. Once the body is healthy enough to support it, reason has to take the wheel.
Reason is the navigator. It is the faculty that allows you to calculate long-term consequences, to see the hidden utility we just discussed, and to steer the ship of your life away from impulsive, destructive rocks.
And reason tells you to engage in the third pillar, fulfilling duties.
We touched on this with the conscience earlier.
Right. Reason dictates that you are part of a society, and therefore you have obligations. You pay your debts, you care for your dependents, you contribute your labor.
When you fulfill those duties, the conscience rests, and the paranoia of the wrongdoer is kept at bay.
Which brings us to the fourth pillar, which is profoundly relevant to our modern psychological landscape, living within one's means.
This one hit me hard, honestly, because it sounds like standard, boring financial advice. Don't spend more than you make.
Right. Very Dave Ramsey.
Yeah. But in the context of this philosophy, and in the age of Instagram, hyper-consumerism, and massive credit card debt, living within your means is actually radical psychological advice.
It is the ultimate defense against the anxiety of pretending.
Wow.
When you live beyond your means, financially, socially, or even emotionally, you are forced to construct a mask.
You are projecting an image of success or energy that does not actually exist.
And maintaining that mask requires a massive expenditure of psychological energy. You live in constant fear of being found out.
You become the paranoid wrongdoer, but your crime is fraud against your own reality.
Exactly. Living within your means is the profound relief of dropping the mask. It's saying, this is what I have, this is who I am, and I have nothing to hide from the world.
It aligns the internal and external mirrors we talked about earlier.
It does.
But I have to push back hard on the fifth pillar. The final requirement for happiness is contentment with what exists.
Why does that provoke a reaction?
Because, honestly, when I hear the word contentment, it often sounds like a polite synonym for resignation. It sounds like giving up.
I can see that.
If I am totally peacefully content with what currently exists, Why would I ever strive for anything? Why would humanity have ever bothered to invent the wheel or discover penicillin or fight for civil rights if everyone was just content with the misery that existed?
It feels contradictory to the idea of the genius who pushes society forward.
Exactly.
Is a vital pushback, and it's a trap many fall into
Mm.
when reading philosophical texts on peace. But Al-Waily anticipates this entirely.
Oh, he does.
Yes, he makes a razor-sharp, uncompromising distinction regarding the timeline of contentment. Contentment must exclusively follow effort.
Oh. So it's not a starting position.
Absolutely not. Contentment without prior, agonizing effort is, in Al-Waily's own words, reprehensible laziness.
It is stupidity.
It is the grazing animal sitting in the mud. True wisdom requires recognizing a harsh, immovable law of the universe, which the text explicitly states, not everything one wishes for is attained.
You can do everything right and still lose.
Yes, you can have perfect health, you can use brilliant reason, you can fulfill every duty flawlessly, you can live humbly within your means, and your business can still go bankrupt.
Your relationships can still fail.
Right. So contentment is the psychological safety net you deploy after you have left absolutely everything on the battlefield.
Exactly. You try your hardest, you push your limits, you seek to cure the disease and fix the societal flaw. And then, when the final result is tallied, whatever the outcome is, you accept it with genuine peace.
Because you know your conscience is clear. You did your part.
The alternative is living in a state of perpetual toxic frustration, demanding that the universe bend to your exact desires.
And that arrogance is a guaranteed recipe for lifelong misery.
But let's look at the darkest outcome of that equation.
Okay.
What happens when that effort fails catastrophically? What happens when, despite following all 5 pillars, we are plunged into deep, enduring suffering?
Because Al-Waily doesn't just say accept it.
No, he makes an incredibly surprising claim about the actual functional value of that deep suffering.
He elevates misery from a tragic accident to a divine instrument. He describes misery as the great purifier.
It is the mechanism that cleanses the soul of its arrogance and polishes the mind to a point of clarity.
He uses a gorgeous natural metaphor to explain this. He says that just as the burning, intense, relentless heat of the sun is required to ripen fruit, misery is required to mature the human spirit.
Think about that. If you bite into a green, unripe piece of fruit, it is bitter, tough, and acidic.
It's inedible.
It needs to be subjected to the harsh radiation of the sun to break down those acids and produce sweetness.
He is saying that human beings, in our raw, untested state, are essentially bitter and unripe.
We think we are wise, but we are just inexperienced. We require the fire of misery to actually develop depth and sweetness.
Precisely. Pain accelerates maturity.
Yeah.
Furthermore, misery acts as the ultimate biological and spiritual warning system. The text uses a very relatable physical example to illustrate this. A simple stomachache.
Right. If you sit down at a feast and you eat far past your capacity, you get a severe stomachache. The pain is intense and miserable.
But if you analyze the utility of that pain, it is actually a lifesaver.
Because imagine if you had a biological mutation where you had 0 pain receptors in your digestive tract.
If you felt no pain, you would have no feedback mechanism to tell you that you had exceeded your physical limits. You would literally eat until your stomach ruptured.
You would consume yourself to death.
The misery of the stomachache is the alarm bell that forces you to stop and saves your life. Al-Waily scales this biological truth up to our emotional and spiritual lives.
So emotional pain, the misery of a toxic relationship, the crushing stress of a bad career choice, the emptiness of a superficial life, that pain isn't a punishment.
It's the alarm bell telling you that your current habits are destroying your psychological organs.
Exactly. But the tragedy of the human condition is that our massive brains often misinterpret or manipulate these alarm bells.
We get the timing entirely wrong.
There is a beautiful, deeply poignant analogy from the text that perfectly captures how we misuse our capacity for misery. It involves a lover.
Yes. I read this part, and it is so painfully recognizable.
Let me see if I can construct how he builds this. He describes a person who is deeply in love. They are with their partner. Everything is perfect in the present moment.
But this person is so intelligent and so aware of mortality that they become utterly terrified of the inevitable future separation.
They know that one day a breakup or a tragedy or simply death will part them.
They foresee the eventual arrival of the gall.
Right. And they become so obsessed with the potential misery of that future loss that they start grieving it immediately.
They're sitting on the couch right next to the love of their life, but they are weeping over a future empty room.
They completely ruin the joy of the present moment.
It is the ultimate tragic irony of human consciousness. By constantly fearing the loss of happiness, we artificially manufacture misery.
We reach into the future, drag the pain into the present, and become our own source of suffering.
Al-Waily is warning us. Use misery as a purifier when it naturally arrives. Heed it as an alarm bell when you're acting destructively. But absolutely do not invite it into your house early out of fear.
But when real unavoidable misery does strike, what does it actually do to us on a societal level? Like, how does the burning sun change the way we interact with others?
It creates the single most important ingredient for civilization: empathy.
Empathy.
Enduring misery is the tuition fee you pay for the capacity to understand others. The mechanics are simple. If you have never experienced the gnawing panic of true hunger, you cannot genuinely comprehend the desperation of the starving man.
If you have never had your heart shattered, you are incapable of sitting in silence and comforting the grieving.
You might pity them, but you can't empathize with them.
Precisely. Pity looks down, empathy looks across.
Without the harsh, visceral, physical lessons of misery carving out those capacities within us, humanity would be a collection of isolated sociopaths.
We would be stumbling blindly in the dark of ignorance, completely incapable of the genuine humanitarian action that holds society together.
Okay, I follow that logic entirely. Misery carves out the depth required for wisdom and empathy. But this leads to a massive contradiction, or at least a severe complication.
There's that.
If misery makes us sensitive, what happens to the people who are born hypersensitive?
Oh, interesting.
The people who feel every emotion, every injustice, every slight at a volume of 11. Does this incredible sensitivity make them ultra-wise, perfectly empathetic beings? Or does it just make them utterly, irreparably miserable?
This question brings us to one of the most brilliant and tragic sections of Al-Waily's entire philosophy, his analysis of the burden of the highly sensitive mind.
He makes a direct, unbreakable connection between extreme sensitivity and human genius.
The people who feel the most, the ones who cannot ignore the pain of the world, are the very same people who drive creativity, push scientific progress, and fight for justice.
They are the engines of humanity.
But this capacity comes at a massive, often devastating personal cost.
It is a curse of vision.
Because they can clearly see the ideal, they can see how beautiful and just the world could be. They are constantly, relentlessly tormented by how flawed and brutal the world currently is.
They are trapped in an exhausting pursuit of perfection and a perpetual dread of falling short.
And Al-Waily uses an analogy here that I think anyone with an anxious, creative, or deeply analytical mind will feel in their bones.
The analogy of the tight string.
Yes. It is a masterful physical representation of psychological tension. Imagine a string on a violin or a cello.
Okay.
If the string is loose, it produces a dull, flat, unremarkable sound. To create beautiful, transcendent music, you have to turn the peg. You have to pull that string incredibly tight.
The tighter it is pulled, the higher, clearer, and more piercing the note becomes.
The genius, the deep thinker, the highly empathetic leader, they are this tightly pulled string. The tension they endure is what allows them to produce the beautiful music of human progress.
But what happens to a string that is pulled to its absolute maximum tension?
It is constantly on the verge of snapping.
The internal pressure is immense. Al-Waily says these highly strung individuals can look out at the world, spot a single microscopic grain of imperfection, and their highly sensitive minds will magnify it.
They blow that single grain up into a massive, suffocating dome that traps them.
They cannot simply ignore a flaw. The tension demands resolution.
And what happens when the string snaps? That's burnout. That's the mental breakdown of the brilliant artist or the dedicated activist who just can't carry the weight of the world's suffering anymore.
They break under their own capacity to care.
And Al-Waily heightens the tragedy of this burden by fiercely contrasting the genius with his depiction of what he calls the insensitive people.
He paints a remarkably stark, almost brutal picture of those who live with a loose string.
He really doesn't hold back. He says these insensitive people are easily satisfied with the bare minimum. Give them a stale piece of bread and a worn-out rag to wear, and they are perfectly content.
They don't agonize over the future of society. They don't lay awake at night mourning the injustices on the other side of the globe.
They are just coasting. And he compares them, again, employing that brutal agricultural lens to animals being led to the slaughterhouse.
It is a dark image. The animals walking up the ramp to the slaughterhouse are blissfully unaware of the blade waiting for them.
They are entirely focused on the hay on the ground in front of them.
They are completely free of existential anxiety, but they are also completely devoid of higher purpose, vision, or the capacity to alter their fate.
This presents a profound, almost paralyzing trade-off for human existence.
It really does.
Geniuses and highly sensitive people are the ones who elevate humanity. They are the ones who figure out how to dismantle the slaughterhouse. They separate us from the beasts.
But they endure immense, lifelong internal agony because their ambition for perfection is boundless.
Yes, and Al-Waily suggests a heartbreaking irony. If these brilliant, world-changing individuals fully comprehended the sheer, crushing weight of the burden they were carrying, they might actually look at the ignorant fool sleeping soundly in the mud, and they might envy him.
The people who are the most useful to the structural health of society are invariably the ones who must sacrifice their own simple, easy peace of mind to achieve it.
That is an incredibly heavy realization. If you are a thoughtful, sensitive person, life guarantees this kind of internal suffering. You are going to be pulled tight.
So how on earth do we endure the long haul of a human lifespan without the strings snapping?
How do we carry the burden without breaking?
Al-Waily provides a survival strategy that we can define as philosophical patience, which he pairs with a very harsh reality check about the true nature of sacrifice.
He tells his readers plainly, stripping away all romance, life is neither pure honey nor is it pure gall.
Gall being the incredibly bitter extract of the colocynth plant.
Exactly. Human existence is never 100% sweet, and it is never 100% bitter.
And he insists that your expectations regarding this mixture will kill you much faster than your actual circumstances.
Because if you walk into life expecting it to be a jar of pure, unadulterated honey, if you expect every relationship to be easy, every job to be fulfilling, and your health to be perfect, you will literally die of sorrow the very first time you are forced to swallow the bitter gall.
The shock of the contrast will destroy your will to live.
But the inverse is equally lethal. If you become entirely cynical, if you expect life to be 100% bitter gall, you will die of despair before the bitterness even touches your lips.
You will preemptively give up, completely blinding yourself to the honey that does exist.
Therefore, survival demands philosophical patience. Al-Waily describes life as a hit-and-run battle.
It is a protracted, messy, generational campaign.
You don't throw down your weapons and surrender the entire war just because you lost a single skirmish on a Tuesday.
Exactly. True wisdom is maintaining your equilibrium through the chaos. It is remaining intensely calm and calculating during disasters, looking for the hidden utility.
And, equally crucial, it is not becoming recklessly arrogant, complacent, or greedy during the times when the honey is flowing.
To really hammer home this idea of extreme patience, long-term vision, and the brutal reality of sacrifice, the text relies on a deeply powerful historical example.
It brings up the story of Al-Hussein bin Ali,
A profoundly seminal figure in Islamic history and a perfect embodiment of the tight string enduring maximum tension.
For those listeners who might not be familiar with the deep historical context, it is crucial to understand the stakes of this story to grasp Al-Waily's point.
Hussein was the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad.
He found himself facing a massive, seemingly insurmountable political and military crisis. The Umayyad Caliphate had transitioned to the rule of Yazid, a leader widely viewed as deeply corrupt and tyrannical.
Yazid demanded that Hussein pledge allegiance to him to legitimize his rule.
Hussein was presented with a stark binary choice, and the text emphasizes that Hussein could have very easily avoided his tragic fate. He had an out.
Right. He could have compromised. He could have swallowed his pride, pledged the allegiance, taken the easy way out, and been rewarded with a comfortable, wealthy, heavily protected life.
He could have chosen the immediate honey. He could have loosened the string.
But he understood the macro architecture of society. He knew that if he, with his immense moral and lineage authority, publicly endorsed a corrupt system, it would legitimize tyranny for generations.
The short-term honey would poison the entire societal well.
So instead, he chose extreme, unimaginable physical misery.
He journeyed toward Kufa, was intercepted, and ultimately chose to stand on the battlefield of Karbala with a tiny band of followers against a massive army.
He watched his family and friends suffer from agonizing thirst under siege, and he ultimately faced a brutal, violent death.
From a purely short-term biological perspective, it looks like an absolute catastrophe. It looks like total defeat. Why would anyone choose that?
Because, as Al-Waily points out, Hussein was operating on the timeline of immortal memory.
His sacrifice achieved an eternal structural good.
By refusing to submit to the gall of tyranny, even at the cost of his own life. His death became the ultimate, enduring lesson against selfishness.
It acted as a massive historical catalyst for religious and social reform that has echoed through centuries.
So when we bring this back to you, the listener, when you are facing a devastating loss in your own life, or when you're staring down a brutal choice between what is immediately easy and what is structurally right, you have to ask yourself what timeline you're operating on.
Are you only looking at the immediate bitterness of the moment? Or are you looking for the hidden long-term good?
Because Hussein's story proves that sometimes ultimate enduring victory looks exactly like crushing defeat in the short term.
It requires a massive evolutionary shift in perspective to be able to see the victory hidden inside the defeat.
But Al-Waily is also a pragmatist. He knows that expecting average citizens to constantly operate with the moral heroism of Hussein bin Ali is impossible.
Personal morality, the sheer willpower required to choose the difficult, virtuous path, is incredibly hard to maintain in isolation.
We are flawed, tired creatures. We need external frameworks to help us keep the string tight.
Which bridges us perfectly into Al-Waily's view on macro-societal management. How does a civilization actually enforce this incredibly high standard of morality across millions of people?
He outlines what we can call the dual guardians of society.
He states that to manage human behavior and to keep the entire organism from collapsing into selfish chaos, society must rely on two distinct complementary systems.
Heavenly or religious laws and positive or man-made laws.
They operate as the two hands steering the wheel of civilization. One governs the physical, the other governs the spiritual.
But I want to press on this because a modern listener sitting in a secular democracy might immediately question this.
Sure.
If we have modern, highly developed legal systems, if we have police forces, DNA forensics, complex court systems, and constitutional rights, why does Al-Waily argue that religion, or a deeply ingrained spiritual legal framework, is still a structural necessity for a functioning society?
It is not a mystical argument. It is a purely pragmatic argument about the hard limits of human enforcement.
Man-made laws, no matter how advanced the forensic technology gets, can only ever police the visible world.
They can only punish what they can definitively prove in a courtroom.
Right. If you are driving on a deserted highway at 3 a.m., and you know for an absolute fact there are no cops, no speed cameras, and no witnesses, the man-made law dictating the speed limit has absolutely zero functional power over your behavior in that specific moment.
You are free to break it without physical consequence.
Exactly. A cunning person, a smart criminal can always find a blind spot. They can exploit legal loopholes, they can hide their money offshore, they can abuse their employees in ways that are unethical but technically legal.
Man-made law is a net with massive holes in it.
Religious law, however, or a deeply ingrained spiritual conscience, is designed to police the unseen.
A true, profound believer will refrain from harming others, stealing, or cheating, even if they are locked alone in a soundproof, unmonitored room in total darkness.
Why? Because they operate under the belief of the ultimate, inescapable accountability of God.
In the spiritual framework, there are no blind spots. It is a perfect, inescapable panopticon.
The text uses a great metaphor here. It describes religion as the soul of the society, while secular, man-made law is the physical body.
One without the other is a disaster.
If you only have the soul, if you only have religious ideals without courts and police, you get chaos and anarchy, because bad actors will exploit the lack of physical consequence.
But if you only have the body, if you only have police without a shared moral soul, you get a cold, oppressive surveillance state where people only do good when a gun is pointed at them.
You need the body to handle the physical disputes of the day, but you need the soul to govern the darkness where the police cannot go.
But this reliance on ancient religious frameworks raises a massive, highly contentious question about adaptability.
Critics of religious law constantly and often correctly point out that rules written centuries ago simply do not fit the complex ethical dilemmas of modern, technologically advanced societies.
And what blew my mind reading this text is that Al-Waily completely anticipates this criticism.
He is remarkably progressive and pragmatic on this specific point.
He explicitly acknowledges that certain religious rules and social applications were heavily dictated by the specific historical time, geography, and culture in which they were revealed.
They were meant for that era.
He relies heavily on the concept of ijtihad.
Let's really break down what ijtihad is, because it is the engine of adaptability in this philosophy.
The root of the word ijtihad implies effort, struggle, or striving.
In a legal and philosophical context, it refers to the independent reasoning and immense intellectual effort exerted by a qualified scholar to derive a legal ruling for a novel situation that is not explicitly covered in the foundational texts.
So if we look at a modern example, say the ethics of organ transplantation or the limits of digital data privacy or artificial intelligence, ancient texts obviously don't mention these things.
Right, so an expert using Ichihad wouldn't just throw up their hands, nor would they blindly apply a 7th century rule about livestock to an AI server farm.
They would look at the core underlying principles of the faith principles, like do no harm, protect human dignity, and prioritize the collective good.
And they would use rigorous independent reasoning to apply those ancient principles to the new technology.
Al-Waily urges modern experts to continuously use this reasoning to reevaluate and update interpretations. He wants to ensure the laws actually serve the public good in the present moment.
He's essentially saying the unseen accountability is real, the moral foundation is eternal, but we absolutely should not stubbornly cling to outdated, rigid social applications that actually cause misery rather than alleviate it.
It's a dynamic, living view of tradition.
It allows the societal architecture to flex without breaking. The core principle of ultimate accountability remains solid steel, but the structural application evolves as human reason and technology evolve.
Okay, we have built a massive philosophical structure here. Let's synthesize exactly where we stand.
We have an internal conscience, locked in a biological battle with the devil in our veins.
We reflect our happiness off the genuine respect of our peers.
We vaccinate our minds with the expectation of pain.
We endure the tension-filled burden of the sensitive genius, and we are guarded by the dual overlapping laws of man and spirit.
But philosophies can easily get trapped in the clouds. I want to bring this down to the dirt.
What is the actual daily mechanical rhythm that keeps this entire massive human machine running? What does Al-Waily say we are supposed to actually do on a random Tuesday?
We work and we rest, but we must do so in a very specific, carefully calibrated rhythm.
We arrive at what we can call Al-Waily's equilibrium of exhaustion.
And he delivers a striking, almost paradoxical maxim to define this rhythm. Get tired to rest.
It sounds like a simple bumper sticker, but it is a profound critique of human motivation and our modern obsession with leisure.
Rest, in Al-Waily's framework, possesses absolutely zero inherent standalone value.
Think about that. We idolize rest, but he says it is worthless on its own.
Rest only acquires value. It only becomes sweet if it is preceded by intense, purposeful fatigue.
If you haven't earned the couch through the expenditure of energy, the couch is not a reward. It becomes a prison.
He breaks down the symbiosis of labor required to keep society moving. He acknowledges that the physical world is built on the broken backs of manual workers.
And he issues a very stark, very clear warning to the intellectual class. The philosophers, the writers, the politicians, the podcast hosts.
He warns them never, ever to look down on physical laborers.
It is a mutual, inescapable dependency. Because if the physical laborers went on strike, if they stopped building the houses, farming the wheat, and fixing the plumbing, the intellectuals would be forced to drop their pens and pick up hammers just to survive the winter.
They would have no calories and no time left to think.
The intellect may direct the labor, but the labor fundamentally sustains the intellect.
I understand the symbiosis, but I have to aggressively push back on this idea that continuous rest is a bad thing.
I am arguing on behalf of basically every single person currently grinding away at a 9-to-5 job. Isn't the ultimate modern dream to reach a point where you don't have to work?
The dream is to write a hit app or have a startup go public, make $10 million, and then just sit on a tropical beach for the next 40 years drinking out of a coconut.
We view continuous, unbroken leisure as the pinnacle of human success. If a robot or AI can do all our physical and intellectual labor, aren't we finally free?
And this is where Al-Waily uses his understanding of human biology to completely destroy that modern utopian dream.
He argues that prolonged, unearned rest is a slow-acting poison.
If you actually achieve that dream of sitting on the beach for 40 years, you will not find happiness. You will breed internal poverty, sickness, ignorance, and a rapid, irreversible gulling of your mind.
Why? If I have no stress, why would I be sick?
Because the human organism is fundamentally designed to encounter friction. Neurologically, muscularly, and spiritually, we require resistance to maintain our shape.
Without the gravity of work, our muscles atrophy and our minds wander into dark, anxious corners.
Continuous rest doesn't feel like a permanent vacation. It inevitably degrades into the absolute worst kind of exhaustion, a soul-crushing existential boredom.
You lose your connection to the societal body. You become the grazing animal again, just waiting to die.
It is the atrophy of the human spirit.
So the goal isn't to escape work. The goal is the equilibrium. You must work just hard enough, endure just enough friction to truly physically need rest.
And then you rest just long enough to repair the tissue to gather the energy required to throw yourself back into the work.
It is an engine that must continuously turn.
Yes, and he adds one final crucial caveat to this engine. You must take on work that actually aligns with your natural abilities and your capacity.
If you force yourself into a role solely for status or money, a role that contradicts your nature or exceeds your true competence, you will generate the wrong kind of friction.
You will fail, you will be deeply miserable, and ultimately you'll become a useless, dragging burden on the society you're supposed to be helping.
So bringing all of these massive interconnected concepts together, Al-Waily's ultimate calculus of human life is surprisingly nuanced.
We started with the idea of a straight line between happiness and misery, and we've discovered it's a deeply complex ecosystem.
He teaches us that pure, good, unadulterated, consequence-free honey is incredibly rare.
And pure evil, absolute, unredeemable darkness is also rare. Human life is lived entirely in the muddy, complex, friction-filled middle.
And wisdom is the ability to navigate that mud.
It is the ability to utilize your reason to choose the path that yields the most structural benefit for the most people, fully recognizing and accepting that every single good choice, every act of healing, comes with a shadow of hardship.
We have covered a truly staggering amount of ground today. We started by looking inside, at the internal battlefield of the conscience, discovering that positive emotion sometimes requires the incredibly tough love of the surgeon's scalpel.
We learned that personal happiness is a mathematical reflection found in the respect of others, and that those who only look out for themselves are basically grazing animals waiting to be swept away by the flood.
We moved from society to the individual mind, discussing how to build emotional armor by anticipating the worst, treating the inevitable miseries of life as a psychological vaccine.
We explored the heavy, tension-filled burden of the highly sensitive genius who is cursed to see all the world's flaws, but who pulls the string tight to make beautiful music anyway.
We learned from the profound historical sacrifice of Hussein bin Ali that short-term, agonizing defeat can actually be the foundation of eternal societal victory.
We looked at how the panopticon of spiritual law guards the dark corners of society. And finally, we balanced this entire architectural marvel on the daily, necessary rhythm of getting exhausted so we can truly deeply rest.
It is a demanding philosophy, but an incredibly grounding one. And I want to remind you, the listener, that none of this is meant to just sit in your head as abstract theory.
This is a highly actionable toolkit for existence. The next time you face a massive setback at work, or a devastating personal heartbreak, or a moment where the world feels too flawed to endure, I want you to remember the analogies we built today.
Remember the tight string producing the necessary music. Remember the ripening sun breaking down the bitter acids to make the fruit sweet.
You are not being randomly destroyed by this misery. You are being polished by it.
You are being polished. I think that is the perfect lens. But before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, directly with a lingering, slightly uncomfortable question.
It's something not explicitly answered by the text, but deeply inspired by our journey through it today.
Al-Waily gives us two incredibly distinct extremes of how to walk through this life. On one hand, you have the highly sensitive genius.
This is the person who pulls the string tight, who invents, who creates art, who fights for justice, and who elevates all of humanity.
But they live their entire life in a state of anxious misery because their eyes are wide open and they see every single flaw in the world.
On the other hand, you have the simple-minded person, the one who is perfectly, genuinely content with just a piece of bread and a worn-out rag.
They are completely oblivious to the burning, complex world around them, and because of that ignorance, they sleep soundly and peacefully every single night.
If you had to choose, right now, today, knowing the costs of both,
which burden would you rather bear? The painful, exhausting, agonizing weight of seeing every imperfection in the world and trying to fix it?
or the peaceful, blissful, empty ignorance of never noticing the flaws at all?
Which one are you? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of the human soul. Keep exploring, keep pulling that string, and keep questioning the world around you.